My name's Bob Allen, and I'm the professor in this business law course. Make sure that you read all of the information that's available in Module 1 of the course as we begin the course. This video is intended to give you a little bit more information about some of the aspects of the information in Module 1. The Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the United States. That means that any law that is generated by any other source of laws in the United States must comply with the Constitution and cannot conflict with the provisions of the Constitution. The United States Constitution does several very important things. First of all, it creates the structure of our federal government by creating three branches of the federal government and providing specific responsibilities and powers of each one of those branches of government. The legislative branch of government has the power to make laws. The executive branch of the government has the power and the responsibility to enforce laws, and the judicial branch of the federal government has the responsibility of interpreting those laws. Now, each of those three branches of government is granted specific exclusive powers by the Constitution, so that a power given to the executive branch of government, for instance, can't be exercised by any of the other branches of government. And likewise for the legislative branch and the judicial branch. Powers that are given exclusively to that branch of government can't be exercised by another branch of government. Now that does two things. First of all, it creates a separation of powers so that all of the power of the federal government is not in one branch of government. But the Constitution also gives each branch of government some power to override or negate some action of another branch of government. That's called the checks and balances part of the United States Constitution. Now, a great deal of time over the years has been devoted to interpreting what provisions of the Constitution mean in specific circumstances, how the Constitution actually applies to certain specific circumstances that arise, and how the Constitution is interpreted really comes down to the viewpoint of the person who's doing the interpretation. One approach to interpreting the Constitution is to look for original intent, which seeks to understand what the Founding Fathers meant when they used specific words and made specific provisions in the Constitution, and how that original intent applies to specific current issues. Closely associated with the original intent approach is an approach that's called textualization, which seeks to understand the plain meaning of the words used in the Constitution. At the other end of the spectrum of interpreting the Constitution is the prudential approach, which seeks to interpret the meanings of the words in the Constitution in the context of the present day. The Constitution uses a particular word. We're not interested in what that word meant when it was put in the Constitution, but what does it mean in the context of today's issues? Closely associated with that approach to interpreting the Constitution is the pragmatic approach, which concentrates on what is the practical impact of words used in the Constitution in today's world. It's difficult to classify the various approaches to interpreting the Constitution as conservative or liberal, but that means that the way that the Constitution is interpreted in the context of today is going to be a matter of constant debate. Now, another important thing that the Constitution does is that it provides in the Constitution itself and in the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, what individual rights are. So freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press. Almost all of those individual rights have over the years been declared by the courts to also apply to organizations like businesses. So the individual rights in the Bill of Rights, for the most part, apply to businesses. But there is at least one specific provision of the Constitution that has special application to business, and that's the Commerce Clause. It's found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the Constitution, and it says that Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. That is, the legislative branch of government has the exclusive power to regulate what's become known as interstate trade. Well, originally, interstate trade meant that if there was a business in one state that was doing business or trade with a business in another state, then the federal government could have the power through the legislative branch to regulate that trade because it's between states, not necessarily between state governments, but between businesses in different states. That's interstate trade. Over the years, though, the definition or the interpretation of interstate trade has expanded, and so that now it's recognized by the courts that the legislative power to regulate interstate trade not only applies to that business in one state doing business with a business in another state, but it also applies to any action within a single state that has the possibility of affecting interstate trade. So there was a case a number of years ago. It was called the Heart of Atlanta motel case, and essentially the motel was refusing to rent rooms to non-whites. The Congress passed a law called the Civil Rights Act that said, well, a business can't do that. A business cannot discriminate in who it rents rooms to. And that law was challenged because the Heart of Atlanta motel was fined for violating the Civil Rights Act. And the allegation on behalf of the Heart of Atlanta motel was that, well, the Heart of Atlanta motel operates within Atlanta. It doesn't operate state to state, and so it's not covered by the Civil Rights Act, and any thought that the Civil Rights Act applies to the Heart of Atlanta motel is unconstitutional. The result of that case that went to the United States Supreme Court was the court said, well, yes, the Heart of Atlanta motel is located in Atlanta, and therefore it's not interstate in nature, but people who travel interstate, people who travel from other states to the Atlanta area who might want to stay in that hotel, their travel and their arrangements are impacted by the policy of this hotel not to rent to certain people, and therefore that affects interstate trade, and that the Congress, the legislative branch, has the power to regulate things that affect interstate trade. And so that's an example of how an interpretation of the words in the Constitution might be different than the founders who wrote the Constitution intended. It may involve things that they never actually thought about. So it's important to remember that the Constitution is the supreme law of the United States, and therefore everything that goes on in the legal realm in the United States has to comply with the Constitution as it's being interpreted now.